put on like headphones or something so it's more clear. But I don't know. You're gonna hear roosters and you're gonna hear like birds and shit.
I think it's part of the fun, actually, right there. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's going to be really interesting. So, in today's call, let's just break down the importance of mobility in the foot and the role the arch plays in that. Because you were kind of talking to me about that a little while ago, and it's really fascinating. And I think it's something that is worth diving into.
When it comes down to the foot and we talk about balance training, there needs to be a conversation about what we call your transverse arch, which if my hand here is the example of your foot, a lot of the times we give a little bit too much attention to what's happening with the inside arch, which they'll call like your medial longitudinal arch. A lot of people will think a flat foot is net bad and a high arch is net good. Neither one is good or bad. It's just a spectrum of variability your foot should have if it's strong and robust. But when it comes to balance training, it's not standing on one leg. It's not standing on a Bosu ball. Those things are just not warranted. What we want to actually challenge is this thing called your transverse arch, which is a secondary arch that it doesn't get a lot of attention essentially. So kind of the base of all of your toes, which I'm showing with my hand here, from big toe to little toe across is going to balance you from right to left. So when we want to challenge this, it's really straightforward. You can do it at your house. You basically want to just stand up and put yourself in a slight staggered stance. So if I'm going to put my right foot forward and my left foot behind me, I'm just on my toes on the back leg, kind of like a kickstand. So you could take your foot off the ground if you needed to. And then I need to shift my weight, which is what we call this fancy term called center of mass. Your head, your rib cage, and your pelvis, you need to lean forward so then you're on top of your midfoot. Once you've done that in that staggered stance, I just need you to lift your heel off the ground like a credit card's distance. And immediately you'll feel your foot go, ooh, this seems really unstable because it is. So you do not need to stand on a Bosu ball. You don't need to stand on one leg and fall around like a baby giraffe. All you have to do, again, is stand up, staggered stance, shift your weight forward so you're in the middle of that lead leg. And once you've done that, you just got to bend your knee a little bit so it's not locked out and hover the heel. You will immediately feel a challenge if you've done this well. And if it makes it too easy, you can add in what they'll call perturbations, which is like a disruption to the system. For a lot of like my concussion clients or people that have like head trauma, it's as simple as taking the visual system out of the equation. AK, can you close your eyes? So an example of that would be like if I move my chair, you're not gonna be able to see, will you?
There we
So
go.
the stance that you're looking for is I'm going to try to challenge with my right foot. So I have to get my weight to shift forward. So this back leg becomes a kickstand. And this knee I have here is soft. So it's not locked out. Once I've done that, I'm just going to float this heel just a little bit. I can immediately start to feel my foot have to balance me from right to left. And if I wanted to continue to challenge that idea, if that becomes too easy, you could rotate your head from side to side. You could close your eyes. And again, like a perturbation is just a fancy way of saying disrupting the system or making it more complicated. So the problem with all of this is you can't really sell that to people in the sense of like a tool or a Bosu ball, which is like kind of the more bastardized version of this because humans interact for the most part with flat surfaces, especially if you're in a city center. So like this needs to be done barefoot. The setup is absolutely crucial to actually challenge that transverse arch. Again, how do you balance from right to left? And you never actually take your back foot or that staggered kickstand leg out of the equation. And if you do the setup well, you will feel this instantly. If you want to make it harder, close your eyes. You might go, oh my God, because a lot of people that have head trauma, um, they start to become over reliant on their visual and vestibular system to tell their body where it is in space. And especially when people are wearing like the classic balloon marshmallow shoe 365 days a year, they're becoming very desensitized and very unaware of how they interact with the ground. So a daily practice that we kind of embedded into kind of like our check-in for Move Well is Am I stable? Do I know where I am in space before I do any sets, reps, exercise, and start actually sweating? So the first thing we do in the program is like, I just need you to stand with your feet completely together. That's what we call a limited base of support. And you're like, okay, this is it, walk in the park. Once your feet are together, I just want you to bend your knees a tiny bit, maybe like 10%, just so they're not locked out. And then from there, close your eyes. You might start to feel this like shifting or swaying back and forth because again, once I take your visual system, your eyes out of the equation, you now have to use the sensory input of your feet to tell you where you are in space. And because your feet are together, kind of like standing on one leg, that's the introductory to challenge this notion. Then step two is what I alluded to earlier, which is that staggered stance. Now we're going to compare right to left. And people that have trauma at the foot, ankle, hip, knee, or even lower back is going to get exposed when you do right side to left side. And another example of like, if you have head trauma, I forget the actual gentleman's name that would have deemed his test, but stand with your feet together, soften your knees and close your eyes, and just march on the spot for 30 seconds. When you open your eyes, did you turn to the left? Did you turn to the right? Or were you actually able to stay completely still and not deviate to one side or the other? The side in which you deviated towards or turned towards, that's the side that you have a bit of impairment in the vestibular system.
Mm.
So again, balance training boils down to things that you can do in your house, barefoot, and just some attention to detail. It does not require fancy this or fancy that. It's just going through these steps and doing it on a day-to-day basis.
How often should I be focusing on these kind of movements? Just the one you showed me in particular. Like, is it a daily thing every other day?
It was really hard, right? Because when I do it by myself, if you close your eyes, especially in that like secondary like perturbation or layer of difficulty, then you can't see the clock. But when you're first starting, have a clock in front of you, and start by looking at the ground. When you get better at this, you can start to look up. So like when we're challenging performance athletes and someone's like running down the field, say in like a soccer situation, that person has to be aware of what's happening with their feet, how they're interacting with the ground while scanning with their visual and vestibular system to make decisions as an athlete. If you had to stare at your feet the entire time to make sure that you felt stable, you're going to be a pretty poor athlete. So we find creative ways to, again, disrupt the system or add perturbations to challenge or add complexity or layers of input that person has to deal with on top of the inherent instability of being in that forefoot, which is just floating that heel just a little bit off the ground. And again, it's going to challenge that transverse arch, the part of the foot that doesn't get enough attention when it comes to trying to restore these qualities.
And the transverse is the one that connects your big toe to your baby toe, like the side to side arch, right?
Yeah, essentially, like if I had to stand on one leg and then lift this, I'd have to try to control this.
Right.
Think of that as the thing that's trying to help you. And then you have these muscles that go up the side of your leg or the outside of your shin. Depending on what year you went to school, they'll either be called your fibularis or your peroneal muscles. And like if you have not challenged the transverse arch, those muscles are going to light up, not in a bad way, but in a way where it's like, holy shit, we haven't done this in a while. When we do assessments on people, some people really like to live in their toes or in their heels. Regardless of who you are or what camp you are, a lot of the time when you're trying to challenge stability or balance again, is getting that person to sense what we call their midfoot, which is like basically, again, can I get my head, my rib cage, and my pelvis, your hips, over top of the middle of your foot? Because some people, they live only in their toes. Some people like to live in their heels. And then when they walk down the street, they almost like very quickly go from A to B. There's no time, there's not enough time spent in the middle. And that's where you have this beautiful opportunity to challenge, especially the transverse arch. So that staggered stance from right to left, where we, again, lean a little bit forward, soften the knee, float the heel like a credit card's distance off the ground. You should, again, instantly feel this is a challenge. Doesn't matter how strong you are, doesn't matter whether you have no experience in the gym. This is a concept and principle that should be able to permeate everyone's experience.
Cool. That all sounds really great. And I could see the advantages to doing this long term. What uh, what can I expect? Like, what kind of improvements in my performance can I expect once I've done this over a course of a couple of months?
Well, to be honest with you, I think we want to start off with building tolerance for upwards of 60 seconds. I think longer durations are going to be the goal in the initial. Before you close your eyes, before you start to add in a head turn, all I need you to do is to be able to tolerate 60 seconds on the right and 60 seconds on the left without falling over. Now, the tricky part is you have to keep this honest. It's like most things in exercise, you can kind of fake the funk, but if you really, really challenge yourself and like while you're doing this particular, like I'll send you a video so you have a visual reference, but like you have to think about like gas pedaling your foot into the ground while you're doing it. It's one of the qualities or strength capacities that people as they age start to lose the ability to gas pedal your foot. Anyone that's worked with me in a class setting or one-on-one, I will always say the gas pedal cue. It applies to both the wrist and the ankle, but more so your foot because you exist on your feet. So when you're doing this stuff, you have to keep it honest, both in setup and the actual hold itself. And the bare minimum is trying to, again, survive 60 seconds before adding in any other challenge or layers of difficulty. What you'd expect to see over time is just because you've been able to sensitize and tell yourself where you are in space, you should feel less clumsy. You should feel more coordinated, essentially. Um, yeah, like
Translate into better performance. If I'm into, I surf. And like, is that something that you'd recommend doing for me as a surfer? Because it'll give me better stability on my surfboard. Is it going to give me an
yeah,
opportunity? Yeah.
because like there's so many different disciplines in the world. Maybe the one exception would be powerlifting because it's stationary and it's what they'll call bilateral, having both feet on the ground the entire time you execute the goal, which is to lift heavy ass weights. But like pretty much every other discipline, skateboarding, surfing, field sport, running, you're spending the majority of the time in that midfoot. And that's that isolated thing that we're like kind of challenging in that staggered stance setup with the floating heel. Again, indulging in the midfoot and then challenging the transverse arch, which is usually where people go over too quickly. Whether you're a heel dominant person or a toe dominant person of how you kind of hold yourself in space, aka posture. We just want to indulge in what's happening between those two things and then elevate the heel with your body weight being right here. So then again, that midfoot and that transverse arch has to work really hard to make sure that you don't fall over. Like we have a tremendous amount of internal systems, both conscious and unconscious, that do not want us to fall over. Like to get really fancy and use big words, yes, we all know where we come from like a primal perspective, but we are now in this 2025 day and age, we are bipedal ambulatory creatures, which is just a really fancy, annoying way of saying we walk and we breathe on 2 feet. So that's why when people get older, the biggest fear, especially if you live in an environment where like falling is a real risk, and you're no longer excursioning through like an incline or stairs, you start to lose these capacities of the gas pedal. You start to lose these capacities of like finding your midfoot. You start to lose this capacity to actually like challenge your transverse arch because you've been given an orthotic or this like marshmallow shoe and you've never challenged that, but that's how you exist. So I think there's a huge opportunity. You never have to step foot in a gym. You never have to buy anything. It's just if you can implement these ideas and these principles into your day to day, you're going to see a compounding effect of more stability, more coordination, and you're just going to feel more athletic. Because back to what I was trying to say earlier is every single sport that has a high degree of athleticism, you live in the toes. And I have some athletes that actually goes to their disadvantage. I've worked with basketball players from young up until 30 years old. That's all they've ever known is being on their toes. And that's where you start to see like some knee issues of like overloading the patellar tendon, things like that, where they don't even know how to be in their heels. And when we ask someone to do a walking lunge or a gait analysis, if that person's knee is the first thing to go, that tells me that they probably live a little bit too much in their toes. And there's exercises and strategies I had to show and coach them through to start to prevent from it being a knee dominant strategy. So yes, athleticism is going to live in the forefoot and challenging that transverse arch, but eventually you have to have some type of strategies to also find the heel again. And we have to do an assessment to kind of figure out where you are in that spectrum.
Okay. Yeah, that's really great. So it's not about being all the way up on your tippy toe. It's about just hovering above the ground. Okay.
Yeah, it's so overlooked because like you'll see a lot of times with like chronic or not like acute, I should say, ankle injuries. Yeah, you got to do some calf raises in your rehab setting, but a lot of times the calf raise is bastardized because we just quickly go over the middle part. And sometimes the therapist or a coach will add in a tempo to kind of slow down that mid range, which is a really great idea. But it's not taking into account how you hold yourself upright. Because a lot of times people are in a machine or they're holding on to something while they do the calf raise. And that's taking away how you actually walk down the street. So that idea of that staggered stance, head, rib cage, hips over top of the midfoot, and then floating the heel. That is the recipe of challenging the midfoot and that gradation of like, I need to spend more time here because that's where you're going to learn how to distribute the force. It's not just in your heel, it's not just in your toes, somewhere in the middle. And if you do the setup honestly, I don't care how athletic and how badass you are, it's going to be hard.
That's really cool. So this is something you just recommend doing every day, maybe
Every
first thing in the morning or right before you start a workout, just kind of getting into the zone.
It's a phenomenal warm up. It can be a phenomenal check in with
Yep.
yourself. If you're a person that's hard pressed to do things like meditation or taking 5 minutes to yourself, it forces you to be present. And when I used to teach classes a lot back in Toronto, especially I would do this setup that we're discussing, and I'd get people to close their eyes. And it doesn't matter whether someone's a teenager, they're in their 50s, 60s, everybody in the room smiled. This never would happen if the eyes were open, but when you challenge people's perception of stability and balance and you take away the visual system, it feels playful. It gives this like it's not as serious. People are very like binary in their black and white thinking of like, is this right or is this wrong? Did I execute the squat? Did I execute the press right? It's very judgmental. And there's no room for that when you're trying to challenge what we're discussing here. It's very, very playful. Yes, you can stand on an unstable beam, and that's high level stuff. That's like gymnastics and things like that. But just the day-to-day person that just wants to feel more stable, this staggered stance setup is your opportunity and always will be.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man. That's really cool. And it's funny that you mention like it gets everybody smiling, because I feel like there's something about a simple movement like this surprising you with how challenging it is just by closing your eyes, right? And I guess it's pretty humbling even for your best athletes to be in that situation.
Yes, because a lot of times we overlook, like again, I think something I used to say a lot when I was back in Toronto was I was really upset with people's dose dependent relationship with fitness. Like if some is good, more is better. Like if I can do 10 push-ups, if I do 100, that's better. And it kind of takes this like qualitative notion out of the equation.
Hmm.
So once you give people this simple but not easy setup, I think the only way to experience it is through a playful lens. Like, because you can't try harder.
Gotcha.
That's what's so beautiful about it is regardless of your like physical vocabulary or experience, you're going to challenge yourself with this because this simple execution is born from a tremendous amount of complexity, which is like the various systems that we exist in with the nervous system and trying to just again traverse through this life. Everyone has to walk and everyone has to breathe. And we're just kind of challenging that first notion of walking, isolating the midfoot, and just like, yeah, that's all it is. I would advise anyone to do this. Like, um, And what's so exciting about it is once you understand it and you feel it yourself and you feel like, okay, I can find what I'm looking for, showing that to people is so fun. Like I'm showing it to people here in like a class space, but like showing this to your mom and your dad, showing this to like your grandparents, like that has so much value. It's not even funny. Like I'm going to keep coming back to the geriatric population. The first thing we see people do is they start to excessively use their arms to sit up off a chair.
Mm-hmm.
And like they feel unstable. They need walkers. They need like at a certain point there is a point of no return, but like there's this beautiful window of opportunity to showcase elderly people this concept. Like maybe not close the eyes, but have them hold on to something and find that midfoot when they're not wearing a shoe that we discussed. The preventative measures that can elicit would just be like it's good shit.
Yeah, because it's going to help with balance and awareness in your environment, right? And
Hmm.
yeah, and especially if you're on uneven surfaces, that's usually what gets people if they.
Because here's the thing, some people can't be fucked to do like breathing exercises and like I don't want to do any of this. And then some people are like, I don't want to go lift heavy things, bro. I don't want to go to the gym. I hate that shit. I don't want people looking at me. Visual vestibular balance training should be your window or your entry into challenging your body. And the nice part about it is that it permeates everyone's experience because we all have to walk and we all have to breathe. So I would invite you to do that every day, twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. Can you survive 60 seconds on the right side, 60 seconds on the left side? And once you can do that, close the eyes, turn the head. There's layers of difficulty that you can add, but that's where you start.
So we're not twisting the body at all. We're just moving the head side to side when we're doing
No,
this.
and we'll put up a little video to kind of explain what I'm talking about as I explain it. Yeah, because it's extremely straightforward. As long as you establish the initial position correctly, this is going to be a good time.
Well, can you show us how to do that again?
Yeah, yeah. So like
Okay.
we'll do the second layer, which is the staggered stance here. So I'll move my camera back.
Okay.
Probably shouldn't be wearing these big sweatpants, but you get the idea. Can you see my feet and at least up to my hips?
Yep.
Okay. So the first thing you have to do is staggered stance. So what you need to do is get your head, your rib cage, and your pelvis, so your head, your body, and then your hips over top of the middle of your foot. That's absolutely vital. And the way to do that is we're going to keep this knee here really, really soft. So when I'm standing upright, I go from having weight in my back leg, and I'm going to push off these toes, and I shift forward. So now I kind of feel like bouncy and heavy over top of my right foot. This back leg is not going to kickstand, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
You know you've done this well. If you can, take the back foot off. If I haven't done this well, it's going to be really hard to take this off. So I'm shifted forward to take this out of the equation, and my knee is a little bit bent. Now, the last part is, can I gas pedal my foot down? So can I drive my forefoot into the ground? You'll barely be able to see it on video, but I have like a credit card's distance of where my heel is off the ground. And by the way, it is not up here. That has no value to us. That's what I was talking about earlier, where people, they rush to get to the top. We have a beautiful opportunity right here. That's the money spot. Think credit card underneath your heel. So shift forward, kickstand. This knee is bent. I gas pedal into the ground. And I just have to hold this here. 60 seconds. You can close your eyes, which will make it 10 times harder. It's also really important before you close your eyes or look forward to make sure that your toes aren't scrunched. So yes, you're applying a gas pedal down into the floor, but make sure that your toes aren't curled in the process. The subtlety of lifting that heel is extremely important. The last part is to make sure that you're not jamming into the end range of your ankle. I've seen a lot of people fall victim to this where yes, you're going to have a soft knee, but that doesn't mean ram your knees over your toes. Again, there's these gradations or these spectrums of where I don't need you to go. So what that looks like is, okay, I can't be back here because I can't take this leg off, but I also don't want to be so far forward where I kind of feel like this end range in the front of my ankle. That's also not going to give us what we're looking for. And you'll feel the scrunching of your toes if you've done that. So I have to, again, find my midfoot. Right here is where I want to be. So once I've done that, then I can float my heel a little bit.
Yeah, that's super cool.
A bit of a shake should be happening. This little like tremor and like, oh my God, why is this? Like it's almost infuriating. Like, why is that hard? You know what I mean? So yeah, that's where you start off. And you just want to be able to put your phone or a clock on the ground, start the timer, put yourself in the position, and survive 60 seconds there. And again, if you've done it really, really well, that whole leg eventually is going to light up, but especially the foot and the ankle. And then we can start to add in layers of difficulty, like we discussed, taking the eyesight out of the equation, rotating the head, but the shoulders don't move. There's also this other fancy thing where your support leg starts to step through back and forth to almost mimic how you walk down the street. And that's going to add more instability because then you're truly standing on one leg. So there's a bunch of layers that we start to do in the coaching model that allow you to disrupt the system essentially. But the baseline is the staggered stance, find the midfoot, float the heel, and go to town.
And this is good for everybody.
Everybody.
Right
But
on.
like when I go back home to North Bay, Ontario, I'm going to show this to my grandmother. I'm going to show this to my mother. I'm going to show this to my father. Like my father has neuropathy from going through some cancer recently. So he has lost a lot of the sensation and like kind of deals with some nerve pain when it comes to his foot. So I'm going to take this principle and try to apply it to someone like that. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to show this to everyone I know because it permeates everyone's existence because we all have to stand on our feet in some way, shape, or form.
And even your friends that are athletes or your friends that skateboard and
Yeah.
snowboard,
All my
every
homies that skate, I'm sure maybe get into the surf world while I live in Mexico here. Like I want to be able to show this to people because it's actual training for balance and stability and not selling you bullshit.
that's cool. Yeah, that's really cool, man. I think you really broke that down, and I think we've got something pretty good here to work with. Is there any like closing notes that you want to wrap this up with?
No, I kind of said it all.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And I guess if I got any more questions on where I can reach you, what's like the best way to get in touch, and what are some of the ways that I could start a program with you?
Well, like I said, the program that we just launched called Move Well, every single session, this is how you start the session. Is you're doing a check-in to challenge your stability and balance through these ideas that we just discussed. Um, Everything I do is found on my Instagram, which is the violent patience. Any questions can be answered there, or you can just shoot me a DM, or my email is just info@violentpatience.com. And that's all we got.
Yeah, that's great, man. Well, I appreciate you taking this time today to go over all this stuff with me, and it's always good to connect with you, my friend.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, man. All right.